Welcome to the North Shore Performance Podcast, where we take a deep dive into health and fitness for everyday people and the athlete in all of us. I am your host, Jake Wirtz, and with me is my best friend and co-host, Tanner Schenkel. Together, we take an honest look at fitness and discuss how anybody can improve their lives by adopting a healthy lifestyle. All right, guys, welcome back to another edition of the North Shore Performance Podcast. Today, we have a very special episode for you. This one's going to be a banger, as the kids say. We're going to be starting our Gym Bro Book Club. That's right. The long-awaited Gym Bro Book Club. Well, let's see if I can not stutter over that, but go ahead.
Yeah, so we're each going to essentially read the same book, like a standard book club. And then we're going to meet probably every, 4 or 5 chapters or so. And we're going to discuss like our takeaways, discuss like what those chapters are about. And all these books are going to be not just about lifting. There'll be some lifting books, but they're also going to be about like just like self-improvement, self-development, kind of like mental thing. I know we both each like the stoicism stuff. Maybe we'll tackle some of those books. But just something that's going to kind of make us think, make us discuss, and just try to make us better people in general. So kind of fun, exciting, looking forward to it and just kind of seeing what we come up with.
Yeah, and this idea was really born from just a conversation we had about different stuff that we were reading. And I know reading was a big goal for us this year, for both of us individually. Tanner, he's a big time reader, so his goal was something crazy like 50 books. I just want to knock out 12 this year because then at least I feel like I'm making progress. But it was something that was kind of top of mind for both of us, and we both like to learn, and that self-development space is something we both really enjoy. So we were just talking about it, and we're like, well, if we had like a book club or something like that where we met every week, every few weeks, to just talk about a few chapters at a time, it kind of dive in it that way. It could be a lot of fun. And we're like, well, why don't we just make a series out of that? We could pick books that are kind of related to the podcast and just share it with you guys. And if nobody likes it, that's all right. It's about us. This is about us.
Yeah, I agree. It's if no one's going to listen to these, that's fine. But I think we can each get some value out of them and discussing different things, mindset, ideas, and just in general. So if you guys don't like them, that's fine. We're still probably going to do them. Maybe we won't post them, but we're still gonna roll through with it. So, but the book we are reading first is a book by Tony Dungy. It is Quiet Strength. So far, just kind of talking about his journey after he got let go by the Bucks and kind of how he kind of worked through that as a person. Talked about how, and then it kind of talks so far about his beginning life, how he got into football, and kind of things of that nature. And he's a very religious man, so a lot of it, he talks about his relationship through Christ during some difficulties, and just in general, just how Christ was always by his side, no matter what the circumstance was, if he was coaching and winning Super Bowls or if he was getting fired from his job. So kind of pretty inspirational person. I know he's like one of a lot of people's favorite, their favorite like NFL head coaches. Just overall good guy. So what do you think about Tony Dungy words?
Yeah, I think we should probably explain a little bit who Tony Dungy is. Obviously, yes, he's a football coach. Yes, he won a Super Bowl with the Colts, and I think he's a Hall of Fame coach actually as well. But he's more than that. And the thing that people really respect about him was not only was he a great coach and he had a great relationship with his players and things like that, but he is, because he's still alive, not was, he is a man of great integrity, and he talks a lot about doing things the right way. And if you know anything about the way the Colts teams were built back during their Super Bowl runs, the character was a big part of the players they'd bring onto their team. They wanted the right guys. They wanted to do things the right way. Sometimes in professional sports, I get it. You don't want to have a team full of choir boys, but sometimes in professional sports, teams tend to overlook, some major character flaws for the sake of having a talented player. And I think that most people respected about Tony was he held his team accountable. He held himself accountable. and just his demeanor. He's like the definition of like a stoic coach on the sidelines. He had that calm and quiet presence. He got mad like anybody else does sometimes, but you couldn't really tell just by looking at him if the team was winning or losing. And that's not common in professional sports. And so I think that's why he stands out so much.
Also helps that he played for the Gophers, right? Like Minnesota Gophers.
Yes, we're going to talk a lot about that. He's a big time Minnesota guy. He's from Michigan, and his dream was actually to play for Michigan and then Michigan State when he couldn't get into Michigan. And he ended up going to the University of Minnesota because the coach that he had a good relationship with went to the University of Minnesota, and he played quarterback for the Gophers. So Sky Uma, if you're a big Gophers fan, and he also coached for the Vikings for a little bit. So there's a lot of ties to Minnesota in this book. That was, we always like to go, oh, he's one of us. When we're our Minnesotan, like
we can't win the Super Bowl as a Viking, so we claim Tony Dungy.
Yeah, Tony Dungy's our coach. We don't care.
Yeah,
but so that was really cool to see. So any Minnesotan would get a kick out of that, I'm sure. And so why don't we jump into the first chapter, Tanner? You had a little summary written up for each chapter, the kind of themes, and then we can just talk about the general ideas.
Yeah. So chapter 1 starts out, it's called Tampa Rain. It kind of jumps to him losing his job, and it's kind of your like movie scene. He's carrying the box full of things through the parking lot while the rain's coming down. He just lost his job, he had his family to support, kind of unsure what the future is going to bring. And that's kind of what's going on in this chapter. He talked a lot about obviously being fired from a head coach position, but he still felt that he trusted God's plan for him. And even though it seemed hard, he still felt like he had more to offer with football. Is kind of the quick synopsis of that chapter.
Yeah, I think the thing that I remember the most about this chapter that kind of stuck out to me was just kind of the visual of him at the facility by himself. There's like the one facility guy that's letting him in and out of the office. He's just been fired. So his key card or his passcode or whatever doesn't work anymore. So for him to go anywhere, he needs someone to like escort him. He's going to his office to collect his personal belongings, and he's just looking at his office and all of his personal stuff that he's packing up. And he's just kind of talking about the memories of watching his kids play in there, having great conversations with friends and coaches and stuff like that. And, how they had a vision to build a team a certain way. And now, in professional sports, it's a cutthroat business. So if you don't perform, you're going to be out. It doesn't matter if you're a good guy or a bad guy or whatever. It's, at the end of the day, if you don't win, you're not going to stick around for very long. So I think that really set the scene. And the one line that kind of stuck out to me, just paging through it now, even was, he's kind of holding it together. He's trying to hold back some, tears and some frustrations or whatever. And he asks, when will I hear your voice, Lord? Because I think we all have those moments, those down moments, those quiet moments where you're looking for a sign. Like, am I doing the right thing? Am I on the right path? And, sometimes he doesn't answer, and that's when your faith comes into play. But I think that was a really powerful moment for me because, here's a guy who's dedicated his life, to Christ, and he's done everything the right way, and it still didn't work out for him right away. And, he's like, did I do something wrong? He questions himself. He questions God. And I think that's a really human reality. It's a very relatable thing that we all could probably, talk about.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think and he had like a Bible verse to start the chapter 2. Like the last line of it was, we get knocked down, but we're not destroyed. But I think that kind of goes with the whole theme that, like, I thought the theme of this chapter was him kind of foreshadowing that there's more to come. At that moment, he didn't really know what was in the future, but obviously it's written. He's talking about an event that happened in the past, so we know what ended up happening to him. So he's kind of foreshadowing. So like the theme, I kind of think was like when one door closes, another one opens. He kept kind of like hinting at that. One of my other takeaways, and I thought this was kind of interesting because the next year the Bucks did win the Super Bowl, if I remember right, with John Gruden. And do you think Tony's place or coaching style just didn't mesh with the team because it was a very talented roster? Or do you think, and they just worked for Gruden better, even though Gruden's kind of a meme of a coach. What's your thoughts on that?
Okay, so if we're gonna get away from the book a little bit and go into the sports rabbit hole, this was when I was very young, so I just want to throw that out there. We were both like 6 or 7 when the Bucks won the Super Bowl back in the early 2000s. But looking back and everything that I've heard from people who have who were there to watch it live when it was happening, it was more so that John Gruden took Tony's team to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And like when Tony got there, they were terrible. And he really got that team, especially the defense. He kind of brought that defense to where it was. And he kind of showed them how to win and stuff like that. He showed them the right way to play. And when Gruden got there, of course, he was the flashy guy. They traded a first round pick for him. That's something people might not remember. The Tampa Bay Bucks actually traded a first round pick to the Raiders to get John Gruden. And that year in the Super Bowl, who did they face? The Raiders. They faced his old team. But a lot of people still give Tony Dungy credit for getting that team to where they were ready to compete. And John, I think, did put them over the top, especially with the offense. You know, he brought the offense to where they were competitive enough. But everybody knows that defense is what kept that team going. I think Tony deserves a lot of credit. Obviously, he's not going to get a ring for it, but Warren Sapp and all those guys talked about how if it wasn't for Tony, they probably wouldn't have been good enough to play in the Super Bowl. So that's a quick little sidebar, but
yeah, that was kind of my thoughts too. I also thought, like, imagine being so close, like, and then being told you can't finish it out. Like, man, that would mess with the psyche for sure. I think like that would hit hard.
I mean, you could make the argument that they probably don't win the Super Bowl with Tony there next year. You know, he's probably not going to bring that offense to where they need to be. You never know. He won a Super Bowl later with the Colts, but they had Peyton Manning, so who knows? It all worked out in the end. I'm sure he wouldn't change a thing, and I'm sure Tampa Bay fans probably wouldn't either. So,
yeah. I also thought it was interesting how many head coaches were under Tony. Like, he's kind of like, everyone talks about like who is it, the old Cowboys coach, his coaching tree, like the Parcells coaching tree. Like, I mean, you got Jim Caldwell, Mike Tomlin, Rod Marielli, Herm Edwards, Lovie Smith, like
Mike Tomlin. I had no idea that he coached in Tampa under Tony Dungy.
Yeah, I didn't know
it's
either.
It's crazy how many good defensive coaches came out from there.
Yep. And it kind of makes you like there's some other coaching trees that you're like, oh shit, like there's some other, like, we should look at some of these coaches and kind of the lines that they drew for other people and either inspired or helped develop into other great coaches and leaders.
I think that really highlights the need for leaders to not just, I think people have a tendency when you're in a leadership position to try to do everything yourself and kind of put it all on your shoulders. But so much of it really is trying to develop the right people around you, find the right people around you to delegate to. You help them grow into a role that can take some stuff off of your plate and help them be successful. It's like, if you really develop the people underneath you, like, that's only going to serve you. And look at his legacy. You know, everybody who's ever worked for him talks glowingly about him, you know, and he developed some really good coaches. They deserve their own credit as well, but you know, everybody gets their start somewhere. So
exactly. Do you have any other go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if we're ready to move on to chapter 2, chapter 1 was very short. It was only like 6 pages, but it does kind of set the scene for, you know, he's kind of asking God, where are you? You know, what am I supposed to be doing now? He thought he might be done with football at that point too.
Yeah, it's kind of really sets the scene for kind of the book and kind of how he is going to, I don't know, pull himself up and figure things out. So, chapter 2 kind of goes back to his childhood. So obviously he kind of foreshadowed about him getting fired, but now he's kind of giving you an idea of who he is and how he was raised and that kind of thing. Chapter is called Growing Up a Dungy. And essentially it just kind of talks about how him, his siblings, his parents, that whole kind of thing. I don't know. I just thought it was interesting how you can kind of see how his mindset is shaped by his parents and his environment throughout this chapter. There's a lot of it's kind of his parents plus just his environment in general. I think this is the chapter, yeah, I got in my notes that he talked about how either you graduate high school and then you went and worked in a factory right away, or you went off to school and his parents probably told him like, you are going to school, you're not going to just stay in the town and work in the factory. And so it's like from a young age he kind of knew that he was meant for something more. And so he kind of has that mindset going into school and sports and stuff like that, that he wasn't just going to stay in his hometown and work. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, at the beginning of the chapter, right next to the chapter title, there's a quote by his dad, Dr. Will Dungy, his father, and it says, "What are you going to do to make the situation better?" And that's kind of the way his parents always framed everything. They always raised him in that kind of way where it's like, sure, a situation might be bad or something might be unfair. And there was some things about race and stuff in here too, about growing up as an African American in his hometown, and some people treated them differently and stuff like that. But he was really like, you know what, like no matter what, like this is my reality. What am I going to do to make it better? And that applied to everything, whether something was screwed up on the team or whether something was going on at school or something was going on at home. His father always instilled in them like, well, whatever the situation is, you can't do anything about it, but what are you going to do to improve it? And there's a quick little, I outlined a whole paragraph here and I just wanted to read it because it kind of stuck out to me. Because I was just a kid, I didn't think to ask for more details when he said, "We taught ourselves to fly." It sounded easy. The lesson, which I did not understand clearly until much later, was that you shouldn't allow external issues to be a hindrance, whether those issues are based on race or any other factor. Things will go wrong at times. You can't always control circumstance. However, you can always control your attitude, approach, and response. Your options are to complain or to look ahead and figure out how to make the situation better. I use what I learned from that lesson daily and almost minute by minute on game day. And that really ties into what we were just talking about, how, what are you going to do to make the situation better? It doesn't matter how you got there. It just matters what you're going to do when you get there. And we talk about, like, you mentioned stoicism either in the last podcast or this one, I can't remember, but that's kind of a stoic idea. Is it's like whatever the conditions are, just be indifferent to it and just do your best, try to make it better. I think that really encapsulates who Tony is as a person too. I don't know him personally. I should say that, never met Tony. If you're watching, we'd love to have you on. But yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that was probably my biggest takeaway from that chapter, is that idea that like oftentimes we're quick to blame someone else for our problems or other external events, circumstances, stuff like that, when we ultimately aren't doing everything in our power to make the situation better. And when you can self-reflect like that, it kind of you turn it internal and you realize, yeah, this situation kind of sucks, but I'm also not making it any easier on myself because I'm doing this and I'm not doing that. And I don't know. I think that was probably a part of the chapter where I kind of stepped back and like self-reflected, like everyone's got a shitstorm they're dealing with. Everyone's problems are obviously their own, and oftentimes we aren't doing all that we can to make the situation better for ourselves, and we just push it aside and blame external things to why this is going wrong. And when we could just man up or figure something else out to make it better. And I don't know, I'm kind of rambling right now, but that part of that chapter really kind of hit home that we just need to sometimes look internally and make sure we're doing everything we can when life gets hard.
Yeah, and I think it's really important too to think about the situation, whatever it is, and you don't have to have an emotional reaction to it. Like just because something's upsetting doesn't mean you have to be upset about it. And that's kind of something that he talks about too. Is it's like his dad's like, "Oh, that's unfair." Okay, what are you going to do about it? You can be mad. And I think the next chapter touched on this too, but there's a moment in a game where he gets so frustrated and he gets so mad. He thinks he's using that as fuel. And his dad's like, no, what are you doing? You look like a clown out there. You're just being erratic and you're not helping anybody. Just like calm down, take it easy. And it's really crazy to think about him as a youth being kind of one of those really reactionary people. Most people gets fired up, and I get that way. I'm naturally like that. And compare that to who he is as a coach when he gets to the pros. Obviously, there's a lot of time in between, but it's just crazy to think that, oh, this is where he started and this is kind of where he ended up. So you can kind of see that you have to put in a lot of work to be like that. It's not everybody's naturally that kind of even keel. His dad was also full of great one-liners. I highlighted a few of them, not necessarily related to this topic we're talking about, but just like some parenting stuff. And as a soon-to-be dad, that's some of the stuff I thought was really great. So here's some of the nuggets. My father often said, if you're going to be a good teacher, you can't just teach A students. A good teacher is one who helps everyone earn an A. It doesn't, that's, I just find that really profound. It makes me smile just thinking about it. It's the same thing like when you coach. I know you've talked about it before where, it's really easy to coach the kids that are really talented, but it's like those kids that maybe aren't as good naturally. If you can kind of help them get better and you kind of step by step see them improve, it's like you get way more fulfillment out of that. And that's really the job of a coach, is to kind of make everybody better, bring everybody up, not just coach the good players.
Yeah, you got to bring up the bottom line. And yeah, no, I liked even his mom too. I thought it was interesting that the story he talked about when he's helping his mom grade papers in this chapter. And she was like, she was more upset that of giving B's than A's. And it was because like, she's like, oh, they could get an A if they just worked a little bit harder. Like
I can help them get an A if I could just teach this better.
She sees the potential in all these students. And I thought that was pretty interesting, and how she was a little bit harder on some of the kids because they weren't living up to what she thought was their full potential. And I don't know, it kind of brings up the idea like and I wrote this down to ask you a question. Are you supposed to treat everyone fairly, even though that fair isn't necessarily equal? So like,
okay, so I think we have the same quote highlighted. Why don't I just read the quote?
Yeah.
Because that was the next thing I was going to bring up. I know that I can have blanket rules, but blanket rules don't always fit every individual. I need to treat everybody fairly, but fair doesn't always mean equal. And that's Tony's parents kind of talking to him about how they have different rules for different kids. I think he was one of 4 kids, and different kids have different needs, and that's another parenting things. It's like, no, I don't think you can treat everybody the same because everybody has kind of different needs. And obviously that's hard because the kids are going to turn around and be like, well, that's not fair. You said Jimmy could stay out till 12 and I have to come home by 9. It's like, yeah, well, we know Jimmy's going to be home on time. You're never going to be here at 9. So like everybody has different rules. I'm sure your parents had different rules. I mean, there's the meme of how the youngest kid always gets away with murder compared to the oldest. Both of us being the oldest, Brock, Ryan, we're looking at you guys like you guys have no idea how easy you have it. But I think every eldest child kind of feels that way, where they look at their siblings and they're like, huh, they get away with everything. But it's like, every kid needs something a little bit different. That's for sure.
Yep. No, I agree. That's kind of why I never thought of it that way until like the way they worded it. And I was like, that's true. Because everyone's going to have like, if you look at me and my 3 brothers, we're Brock and Orr are pretty similar, but I'm kind of the black sheep sometimes, depending on the situation. But like I definitely needed probably a little more structure in life, where you could probably Brock needs a structure too, but you could let Noah go do his own thing and not have to worry he wasn't getting in trouble. So it's like every kid, or even kid you coach, your client, or just in relationships and people you talk to, you kind of have to realize that fair isn't necessarily equal, but obviously we still are giving respect and looking for the best in everyone. And that's the part where it's like, that's the fairness. If you have like that golden rule, or like that, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for, like mission statement you're going to live by, then that's like the fairness. And then the equal part is you're trying to give everyone your whole and making sure they're living up to the potential that you have ability to make an impact on.
Well, it's just like a kid in school. Everybody has their different strengths. Everybody has things that they need to work on. It's the same thing as an athlete. It's like And I think that's why he brings it up, because he uses these lessons he learns as a kid and kind of brings them into his coaching and his parenting as well. But mainly his coaching, he talks about, I think, in the book. And it's like, you can't treat every player the same. Some players you can get on them, you can really get in their grill and kind of challenge them. And other players you have to be more encouraging with. You have to be like, hey, this isn't exactly how we want it, but he's like, you're really close. You got to encourage kids and bring them up. And, I think we've both seen that in our time working with our brothers or with kids when we coach and stuff like that. It's like different people need different things. Quick sidebar. My favorite Noah story. We're coming back from the gym, you, me, and Noah, and we're talking about food. And I think one of us brought up a granola bar, and he's like, What is granola?" And we both looked at him. I think I was driving, and I almost ran us off the road because I just turned around and I looked at him. I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, what even is granola?" And you're like a granola bar, and he's like, "Oh." The kid had like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to derail us, but I can't get over that kid. He never heard of granola. I'm like, bro, what are you talking about?
Yeah, he's special.
How old is he? Like 25?
No, he's 20. I mean, he's like 23, so he's still old enough to
23?
know what granola is.
I mean, I think your parents should have had the granola talk with him by that point, but
he's eating granola bars. I've eaten granola bars next to him before, so I think
what
he was
even
confused
is
by like granola, like on top of like yogurt, like by itself, not like in bar form.
what even is this?
Yeah,
He's eating it. He's like, I don't know what this is. Sorry, Noah, if you watch this, I had to tell this story. But moving on.
But yeah, I think that's all I had for chapter 2. Do you have anything else to add on chapter 2?
No, I don't think so.
No. The next chapter is kind of like his like athletic life
Beginnings.
beginnings. He's trying to figure out who he is as an athlete. He talked about how he tried to walk away from football because he didn't get along with the head coach, and he had like a high school counselor, middle school counselor kind of sit him down and be like, you're walking away from a good opportunity. Just because you don't agree with this coach doesn't mean you should be giving up on your possible career path or your opportunities for obviously further your education by going to school, playing football, stuff like that. That was his counselor, Mr. Rockumore, something along those lines.
Nice.
Yeah. But I thought it was interesting how he talked about that counselor was kind of more that nurturing role in his life. And then he had his coach Cal Stoll was the Gophers coach, if I remember right. Yeah. And he was like a CEO coach, he called him. And he talked about he was a little more hardcore, and he still like didn't get turned off by a more intense coach. And he kind of like took the best parts of each leadership role and I don't know, he kind of adapted to it, which was interesting. Like some people shut off by certain coaches, and Tony kind of seemed to, for the most part, after he had the issue with his football coach, to kind of find the best in people in that way, and kind of, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, be able to adapt and take the most out of whatever coach in style you're dealing with, and learn how to work with people that you might not necessarily be able to work well with, but be able to just, you're going to work with difficult people, and you just got to kind of make it work.
So I have a question for you, because we were just talking about how a coach kind of has to treat different people, different players differently based off of what they need. As a player, were you somebody who, which kind of coach worked best with you? Somebody that was kind of up in your face and kind of challenging you a little bit, or were you like more, you needed somebody to encourage you? Because I definitely had a preference, but I want your answer.
It really depended on how they came about it. I had a coach the year I played football that got in my face and yelled at me, but it was for like, I just didn't know. Like, if you yell at me because I'm like taking it easy or whatnot, and you need to put a boot in my ass, like that's all for it. Like I can be that kind of coach, and I tend to be that way. But this coach yelled at me just because I was confused and I didn't know, and I didn't know how to ask. And so he just yelled at me out of frustration. And I think most athletes can tell the difference. Like there's coaches that are going to yell at you because they want the best out of you. And there's coaches that are going to yell at you because they don't know how to talk to you and teach you. And I definitely I would say I lean towards more of a coach that's going to be nurture and like inspire and pick me up. But I still find value in a coach that's a hard ass and is going to yell at me. Like I remember our football coach, Coach Brian, or even Coach Cross. They're both very like they can pick you up when they need to, but they were very like intense, like can be in your face yelling and whatnot. And I still think they're some of the greatest coaches I had. But as long as they're yelling like because there's value behind it, or like it's because I'm not giving it all or something of that lines. If you're just yelling at me to yell at me because you're frustrated because I don't know the answer, then
Because you
I
didn't
don't think
teach
you're
it
a
well
coach.
enough
Yeah,
as
I
a
don't think you're
coach.
a
Yeah.
coach. You're just yelling at me to yell at me. It's stupid.
Yeah. I definitely agree with you. I personally, especially when I was younger, I really needed more of that encouragement as a kid. I didn't have a lot of confidence, especially when I first started off in sports. You know, I was always kind of a goofball on the team too or whatever, but I really responded well to that encouragement. If I did something well and I got some positive reinforcement, that really helped me. And I think, you know, so when I coached, like when you and I coached together for that little while, that was always kind of I always kind of gravitated towards those players that were more in their shell and they're kind of on the quiet side, or that you could just tell they didn't have a ton of confidence. Cause I was that kid, and I really feel strongly like getting them to kind of to get some confidence and get some encouragement in what they're doing, and be like, no, you're doing this the right way. Keep doing it this way. And you just see them kind of spiral upwards. And it's really cool to see people kind of break out of their shell like that. But I needed that as a kid. You know, I had a baseball coach when I was really young. Uh, he was a loudmouth. Don't get me wrong, but he always was like, nah, kid, nobody better. You could do this. You know, he was constantly just pumping me up, even when I wasn't playing well, you know, and I believed him, you know, he just was so confident about it. And you touched on like Coach Bryant, and he can get on you if you're screwing off. Really, if you're not doing your work or if you're not giving your full effort, that's kind of when he got after you. But he was always super encouraging with me too, like in the weight room, because he was the strength coach as well, and strength and conditioning in the summer. He was always super great about encouraging you to keep going, give great effort. He'd push you. Yeah, and the only time he kind of got on us, I felt, was like, yeah, if you weren't doing your work or if you weren't putting in the effort that was required to do good, to be
And that's
great.
fair to kind of put a boot in your ass and yell at you a little
And
bit.
that's what good coaches do. They challenge you when you need it, and that's what we're saying. You know, you can't treat everybody the same. They challenge you when you need it, and they give you encouragement when you need it too. And that's the best of both worlds. But I just had to ask you that because since we're on the topic of like self-development and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of interesting lines that I had highlighted. This is when he gets to the University of Minnesota. By the way, the title of the chapter, we should probably start with that every chapter, Tanner, is a black quarterback. That's the name of the chapter, a black quarterback. And he talks about how it's really uncommon in that era for a quarterback to be African American, and how he had a bit different of a style than your typical drop back quarterback. He wasn't the big 6'5" hulking guy with a cannon of an arm. You know, he had a different play style. And so he had to really find his niche and kind of prove himself constantly each level. And I had this really great conversation with Coach Stoll at the University of Minnesota. Kind of when he sits down the freshmen at the beginning of the year, every freshman class, Coach Stoll held a meeting with the freshmen every year. During the course of our meeting, he asked, every one of you thinks you're going to play in the NFL, right? Every head in the room nodded. He pulled out a photograph of the freshman team from 5 years prior. The guys who made it to the circle, or were the guys who made it to the NFL, were circled. Him and him, he said, pointing to the picture. 2 of them made it out of 32, 33, 35, whatever we've got this year. 1 of you will go play in the NFL, or if you're lucky, 2. You're going to have to outwork everybody in this room and then catch a break in order to make your living in the NFL. And I thought that was a really cool line where he highlights how, yeah, just because you're a talented athlete and you have all the confidence in the world, it's like, that's not enough.
Yep.
You know, and it's not just in professional sports, it's everything. It's like, you might have the ability, but you're going to have to work for it. You're going to have to really want it and prove that you want it, no matter what we're talking about. If it's lifting or business or education, it's like, you can't just coast. You're going to have to put your ass in the seat. As Ryan Holiday always says, you have to put your ass in the seat, and you're going to have to just do the work. Just start and do the work, you know? And I found that really, I really like that line by him where he kind of tells them, like, no, most of you guys aren't going to make it.
Yep.
So you have to work really hard to be the ones that do.
I think that's an important thing as a coach, that sometimes, like, especially when you're playing at D1 at like university, like Minnesota, like, yeah, it's not like the Alabama, but it's still like you're playing at a high level to make it there. And you're told since you're 3 years old that you're the next coming, you're the greatest football player that's come out of your high school or whatnot. And when you get and you play a bunch of players at the same level as you could kind of get humbled. And your whole goal is like, oh yeah, I'm going to play in the NFL. Like, that's what I'm doing. But I think it's interesting how he put it that way, because as a college coach, he's not just in charge of, like, obviously he wants to put the best football team on the field, but I think as a coach, your job is to make them and develop them into better people in general. And I think some of these guys need to realize they're not making the NFL, so they better make sure that they get their degree or they figure out what they're doing after school. And I think that talk kind of can open some eyes and make you realize that, yeah, you might have goals and aspirations to be in the NFL, but it's important to make sure that you have that foundation to fall back on if that doesn't work out.
Success is uncommon and not to be enjoyed by the common man, is another line he said right after that.
Yep.
The truth is that most people have a better
too.
chance. The truth is that most people have a better chance to be uncommon by effort than by natural gifts. That whole section of the chapter is just mostly about how hard work is what's really going to separate you and propel you to wherever you want to go.
Yep. It reminded me of the I don't know whose quote this is, and the percentages change every now and then, but the whole idea, like, in order to have what 1% of people have, you have to be willing to do what 99% of people aren't willing to do. Like, the whole idea, you got to do the extra step.
That math checks out.
Yeah, it does check out.
That math.
I think the quote is actually like, in order to have what 10% of people have, you have to be doing. But anyways, the math works, and it's a little more intense that way. But it's putting the extra effort, doing the little things, and making sure that when you have like a fork in the road, you take what is going to make you the better player and not the easy way out. Not take the path of least resistance. You're pushing through to get better, develop better athlete, better person in general. That's what Coach Stoll is trying to, like, get out of his freshman coming in.
Yeah, and I think honestly, not to boost our ego too much, but I think you and I were really good examples of that as players. Neither one of us were at all the best in whatever sport we were playing. I never started in football. I loved it, but I was never good enough to play. But I was always one of the kids that tried really hard at practice, and it didn't get me to a point where I was playing a lot, but it was still like I felt like I earned the respect of a lot of people on my team, and they knew that I was going to at least give the best effort that I had. In baseball, it was a little bit different because I started that at a much younger age. And I had a coach once pull me aside and they were like, you know, you're one of the harder workers on the team. Like, you actually try and practice, where some of these kids, you know, they're just here to goof off. And I did my fair share of that too. But, you know, I always like understood that was a really important part of, you know, sports or life or whatever. Just kind of, like you said, doing the dirty work and really getting after it and putting your best foot forward. And here's the other thing too. I'm kind of a perfectionist. So like, if I made a mistake in practice, it would eat at me for a whole day until we got to practice the next day or the game. Like, I'd go to dinner and I'd still be thinking about that ground ball that I missed or whatever. I'd be pissed, you know, and I was maybe a little too emotional like that, but you know, everybody has their warts. So
yeah, exactly. But I think I don't know, it's important. Like, it's the whole idea, like, what is it? Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't want to work hard. Like, that whole idea too. I think you can take a lot of those different sayings and motivational posters that you see with kittens and stuff on them, and you can take those, and that's what this chapter is about. Like, it's like, when you just need a kick in the ass and you're trying to find some motivation, or you're reading these quotes, that's essentially what this chapter was. It's explaining that like you got to work hard if you want something in life, and you have goals and you're shooting for success. It's not just talent that's going to get you there. It's going to be busting your ass and getting them chopping, as Coach Brian would say, to get you there.
Yeah, and even with all the work that Tony Dungy did, working as hard as he did, he went undrafted as a quarterback. He did not play quarterback in the NFL. And I think there were more rounds back then. I think it was like 10 or 15 rounds or something crazy like that. Now it's only 7, but all 32 teams, or however many teams it was back then, I should say, every single team in the NFL said this guy can't play quarterback at the next level. Went completely undrafted. He had to sign as an undrafted free agent and agree to play a position he had never played before. I think he played safety for the Steelers or something like that. One of the best defenses of all time. He gets to go play for, but to a position he had never played before on one of the best teams in the entire league. You know, as hard as he worked, he still ended up on the bottom of the totem pole on a great team he was never going to see the field for, or theoretically, and that's just the situation that it was. So that goes to show that even with all that hard work, you're not guaranteed anything.
Yeah, and I mean that's essentially what chapter 4 is about, putting God first and talking about that, how his experience with the Steelers. I think he won a Super Bowl with them, and then he got traded a couple times. Kind of talking about his career being kind of like a journeyman defensive back, and then being told that people think he'd be a great coach, and kind of getting his next shot in football with obviously coaching, and that's kind of where we left off, is that he's now getting into a coaching role. But I thought like you talked about just now is the kind of the theme of the last chapter, when like Coach Stoll's like, only 2 of you making the NFL. Like that, like Tony made it, but he had to be undrafted, change positions, and willing to work at that, and putting an effort to learn a whole new position that he's never played. He maybe played in high school or youth or whatnot, but like at that level he's never played. And then some luck too, because someone was willing to take a shot at him. Like,
yeah, and I think the humility of it too, because he had some offers to go play. I think it was the Canadian Football League to play quarterback, and he had the humility to be like, you know what, the NFL is my dream. I'm gonna go do whatever the coach says. I'm gonna go do whatever the coach wants. I'll learn a new position if that's what he wants me to do. And he didn't just like learn it. He didn't just go to practice. He worked extra hard. He stayed late. He watched film. He worked with his coaches on the side. He did everything he could to learn a new position and to kind of earn a place on the team. And like the next chapter, he talked about his experience about making the Steelers roster, and how back then they didn't call you to be like, hey, congratulations, you made the team. They didn't make a big deal out of it. You just didn't get a call saying that you were cut.
Yeah.
And so he went to the facility the next day, like wondering if his key card was going to work. And he was almost surprised when his card worked. And he's like, oh, I made the team. And the coach is like, shut up, get to practice. It's like, he still had to work, but it was that cool moment. Like we talked about, the humility. He had to like put his faith in God and learn a new position and do all these things that might have seemed unfair to him, but he said, you know what, this is what I have to deal with here in the situation. I'm going to make the most of it. And he put all of that stuff aside. He worked his tail off, and he made the team, which is, looking back, crazy when you look at how stacked that Steelers team was back in the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty wild. The steel curtain.
Do you have any lines or quotes in this one that really stood out to you?
Not in chapter 4. I really didn't have a lot. It was kind of, I don't know, it was more of like storytelling. I didn't feel like there was, besides obviously like we talked about, like picking yourself up, putting the work, making sure like you're taking every opportunity to get better, and no matter what, being versatile, changing course when life throws it at you. But I didn't really have any like takeaway quotes, because I felt like he was just explaining a story and then wanted the reader to get those lessons, I guess, from the story.
Yeah, one quick story that he that he wrote in this chapter that I liked. I kind of alluded to it earlier. As I said earlier, I always had a problem with my temper. I often earned technical fouls in my high school basketball games and was known to lose my cool in football games as well. In high school and in college, I was a perfectionist, usually riding my teammates rather than encouraging them. Venting, I called it. Dumb, my dad called it. Our exchanges usually ran something like this. Did you change the referee's call? No. Did it make the situation better? No. But I felt better, and then I could focus. Well, you might have felt better faster if you were thinking about the next play instead of taking 3 or 4 plays to vent. You waste a lot of emotion and energy in venting or worrying about an injustice or something you can't do anything about. And again, you can kind of see these little nuggets that he takes from his parents and these other lessons. And it kind of leads him to being the quiet and stoic person he is on the sidelines as a head coach one day. And it's true. We waste a lot of our energy and our emotional energy, especially on just focusing on stuff we can't control, man. Just always focusing on the negative. And the truth is 90% of the stuff we can't do anything about. It's way better to just be apathetic towards it than upset about it. And I've fallen into this trap too, where you care so much that every little thing upsets you and you're just upset all the time about every little injustice, like he said. Sometimes you just gotta let it roll off your back, though, and just don't sweat it. Whatever, it happened.
Yeah.
I'm already past it. I can't waste my energy on that.
Yep. Don't cry over spilt milk.
Spilt milk is the worst, dude.
But you don't cry over it. Just move on, clean it up, move on.
I don't cry. Not over spilt milk.
Exactly.
All right.
I think Seneca said that one.
Yeah, Seneca said, "Don't cry over spilt milk, you bitch."
Yeah.
Yeah. Well. Oh, I love that. All right. Well, do you have anything else in this chapter, or should we wrap it up?
Nope. I don't. I think you kind of wrapped it up pretty good. So I have nothing else to add.
All right. So that is our first Gym Bro Book Club, Quiet Strength by Tony Dungy. We went through the first 4 chapters. A lot of great conversations. This is going to be kind of a longer form podcast, apparently, and we're going to take our time with it, kind of enjoy it, have some conversations. Let us know what you guys think. If you have any great recommendations for us to read next, I think this will take us a couple of weeks to get through, but when we do, we're open to suggestions. Anything in the self-development sphere or coaching or strength and conditioning, stuff like that, if we want to get more into the technical side of it. But yeah, let us know what you guys think.
Awesome. As always, no excuses.
No regrets. See you guys later.